The first crack sounded like a rifle shot, but Emma Garrison knew better, because she had cut enough timber in her life to know the difference between a gunshot and a support beam giving way beneath its own weight. She was 30 feet above the rushing water of Copper Creek, balanced on a scaffold she had built with her own 2 hands, when she saw the fresh saw marks hidden beneath a smear of pitch on the north truss, and in the same breath she heard the stagecoach horn echo down from the switchback road above, announcing that the overland stage was already committed to crossing her bridge. "No," she said, to no one, to the wind, to the mountain. "No, no, not yet." She had inspected that truss 3 days before. It had been whole then, sound as any joint she had ever cut, and now it was scored nearly through, weakened just enough that it would hold a man's weight, or a horse's, but not the full loaded weight of a Concord stagecoach with 6 passengers and a strongbox, not on the grade, not with the spring melt roaring beneath it louder every day as the heavy snow up in the high country gave way to warmer air. She did not stop to wonder who had done it. There was no time for that particular fury, not with the driver already whipping his team onto the near end of the span, not with the whole bridge groaning under the first wheels. Emma Garrison ran. She ran across her own unfinished bridge, skirts hitched in one fist, hammer still swinging from her belt, screaming at the top of her lungs for the driver to hold up, for the love of God, hold up. And when the horses shied at the sight of a woman flying toward them like something loosed from a nightmare, the driver hauled back on the brake with both boots planted and both hands white on the leather. And the coach lurched to a stop with its front wheels not 10 feet past the place where the cut truss waited to fold. For one endless breath, nothing happened. The creek roared. The horses blew and stamped. A woman inside the coach was sobbing in short, startled bursts, and a man's voice demanded to know what fool notion had nearly turned them into the water. And Emma Garrison stood in front of 6 lathered horses with her chest heaving and her hands shaking. And she looked down at the truss that had almost killed a coach full of strangers. And she understood, with a clarity that settled cold and hard into her bones, that someone wanted her bridge to fail, and wanted it badly enough to risk killing whoever happened to be crossing it when it did. The driver, a weathered man named Cobb who had been running this route since before the war, climbed down slow and careful, testing the boards beneath his boots like a man walking onto lake ice. "You are telling me," he said, "that if I had come across at a trot instead of a walk, we would be swimming." "I am telling you," Emma said, "that someone cut that truss on purpose, and I want you to look at it before anyone moves this coach 1 more inch." He looked. He was not a stupid man, and he had hauled freight and passengers over worse roads than this one. And when he saw the pale wood showing through the pitch, saw the deliberate angle of the cuts, his face went the color of old ash. "Lady," he said, "I have hauled this route 11 years, and I have never once had cause to thank a woman for saving my life. I reckon today I do." Emma did not feel like being thanked. She felt like being sick and angry and very much alone on a mountain road with a half-built bridge and a saboteur she could not yet name. It took the better part of an hour to walk the horses and the empty coach back off the span, to lighten the load, to test each remaining truss with the slow and careful hands of people who had just learned exactly what could happen if they did not. And by the time the sun had climbed high enough to burn off the last of the morning fog, the coach was rolling again, crawling down off the bridge approach and along the wagon road that ran below the pass. Listing badly on its rear axle, where the sudden stop had cracked something, Emma could hear grinding with every turn of the wheel. She rode inside the coach herself because Cobb had asked her to, in case the whole business gave out entirely before they reached help, and because, if she was honest with herself, she did not want to be alone just then with the knowledge of what had almost happened. They did not make it far. The axle gave for good 3 miles down the grade, at the exact place where a split-rail fence ran along the road, enclosing pasture that climbed away toward a low ridge. And past the ridge, the unmistakable shape of a trading post with a long porch and a tin roof catching the noon light. The coach lurched, tipped, and settled hard against the fence rail with a crack of splitting wood, and every soul inside was thrown against every other soul. And when the dust cleared, Emma Garrison found herself sitting in a stranger's pasture with her hat gone and her hair half down and her hip aching where she had struck the door frame, staring up at a man who had come running from the trading post at the sound of the crash, a rifle in one hand and an expression of pure startled alarm on his face, and who stopped dead in his tracks the moment he got a clear look at her. "Emma," he said. She knew that voice before she knew the face, because 8 years had put lines at the corners of his eyes and had broadened his shoulders and darkened the sandy color of his hair into something closer to wheat gone dry in August. But the voice had not changed at all, low and careful. The same voice that had once told her, on a porch in Bozeman a lifetime ago, that he thought she was the most stubborn woman he had ever met, and that he did not intend to let that stop him from loving her anyway. "Andrew Stone," Emma said, and her own voice came out smaller than she meant it to. For a moment neither of them said anything at all, and around them the wreck of the stagecoach settled and groaned, and passengers climbed out shaken but whole, and one of the horses stamped and blew, and none of it seemed to matter half so much as the simple fact that Andrew Stone was standing in front of her with a rifle in his hand and an old wound in his eyes that she recognized because she had put it there. "You are hurt," he said finally, setting the rifle against the fence post and crouching to offer her his hand. Is everyone hurt?" "Shaken," Emma said, taking his hand and letting him pull her up, feeling the calluses on his palm, the same rough carpenter's calluses she had on her own, though his came from different work than hers. "A cracked axle and my pride mostly." "That fence has stood 11 years, Andrew said, glancing at the broken rail with something almost like humor breaking through the shock. "I suppose it had to fall to something eventually." Cobb the driver limped over, favoring one leg, and introduced himself, and explained in a few clipped sentences what had happened up on the bridge: the cut truss, the near disaster, the cracked axle that had finally given out here at the bottom of the grade, and Andrew Stone's expression went from concern to something flatter and harder, something Emma remembered from years ago when he used to talk about the men who ran cattle through fence lines that were not theirs to cross. "Cut," Andrew said. "Not weathered, not rotted, cut. Cut clean and hidden with pitch," Emma said. "I built that bridge myself, Andrew. I know every joint in it. Somebody wanted it to fail, and wanted it to fail with people on it." He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him do the arithmetic that everyone in this country eventually did, the arithmetic of who profited from a road being unsafe, of who benefited when travelers had no choice but to take the longer route through the canyon, and she saw something settle behind his eyes that told her he had already arrived at an answer she had not yet spoken aloud. "You had better come up to the store," he said. "All of you. It is a fair walk to Larkspur from here, and that axle is not fixing itself before dark. I have a stove, and coffee, and more room at my table than I have had cause to use in longer than I care to admit." They walked up the rutted lane together, Emma and Andrew a little apart from the others, the passengers grumbling and Cobb limping and the horses led along behind, and 600 acres of grass and timber and pasture rolled out on either side of them. All of it, as Emma would come to learn, belonging to the quiet man beside her, all 600 acres purchased and cleared and fenced in the years since she had last seen him, all of it worked alone. Andrew Stone's trading post sat at the base of the pass like a single tooth left standing in an old jaw, a long low building of hewn logs with a porch that ran the whole front of it, a corral out back, a barn beyond that, and behind the barn, 600 acres of good Montana grass climbing away toward timber and then toward the gray shoulders of the mountains themselves, where even now in late spring, snow lay thick and heavy in the high bowls, waiting for warm days to loosen its grip. Inside, the store smelled of coffee and leather and wood smoke, shelves lined with flour sacks and coiled rope and bolts of cloth, a counter worn smooth by years of elbows, and behind the counter, through a doorway, a kitchen with a good iron stove and a long table built for a family that, as far as Emma could tell from the single-place setting drying by the wash basin, had never come, or had come and gone and left the table empty. "Sit," Andrew told the shaken passengers, pulling out chairs, fetching cups, moving through his own kitchen with the economy of a man who had done all of this alone for a long time. "There is stew from last night and bread, and I will send my hired man down to look at that axle directly." "You have a hired man?" Emma asked, mostly to have something to say, standing awkward near the door while he worked. "Tom Ellery comes up from Larkspur 3 days a week to help with the stock, otherwise it is just me." He said it without self-pity, simply a fact laid down like a board across a gap, and Emma felt the weight of it anyway, the emptiness of that table, the single-place setting, the 600 acres that one man alone could not possibly need for himself. She helped him carry bowls, out of old habit more than manners, and when their hands brushed passing a ladle back and forth, neither of them said anything about it, though Emma felt the old current run up her arm same as it ever had, unwelcome and entirely undiminished by 8 years and several hundred miles. Later, after the passengers had eaten and settled onto the porch to wait out the afternoon, after Tom Ellery had ridden up from town and confirmed that the axle was cracked clean through and would need a forge to mend, after Cobb had sent a boy running for the sheriff in Larkspur to report the wreck and the sabotage both, Andrew Stone found Emma standing at his fence line, looking back up the grade toward the mountains, toward the pass where her half-finished bridge waited with its cut truss and its unanswered question. "You built that bridge," he said, coming to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth off him in the cooling afternoon air. "The Territorial Road Commission hired a woman to build the Copper Creek Bridge." "They hired the best bid," Emma said, a little sharper than she meant to. "It happened to be mine." "I did not say it wrong," Andrew said, and there was the ghost of a smile in it. "I am saying it is the kind of thing I always thought you would end up doing one way or another. You were building furniture better than your father by the time you were 16. I remember." "You remember a great many things," Emma said, and it came out quieter than she intended, and for a moment the old careful silence stretched between them, the one that had swallowed whole conversations back when they were young and foolish and certain that time would simply wait for them to sort themselves out. "I remember all of it," Andrew said. "I remember you told me you would rather build something that would outlast both of us than spend your life keeping house for a man who thought a wife's hands belonged only in a kitchen. I remember thinking you were the most stubborn, most impossible, most remarkable woman I had ever known, and I remember not having the sense to tell you so before you left for Bozeman." Emma's throat tightened. "You could have written." "I did write," Andrew said. 4 letters. I burned 3 of them and sent the 4th, and you never answered it, so I decided you had made your feelings plain enough." "I never got a letter," Emma said, and something cold moved through her, an old grief reopened by a fact she had not known until this moment. "Andrew, I never received one single letter from you. Not one." They looked at each other for a long moment in the fading light, 8 years of silence suddenly explicable and suddenly, cruelly, too late to fix, and Andrew Stone let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. "Well," he said finally, with the dry, careful humor she remembered now, the kind that had always been his way of setting down a weight too heavy to carry any other way. "That is a fine piece of information to learn 8 years too late, and standing at a broken fence, no less." "You did break the fence," Emma said. "I did not break the fence. Your stagecoach broke my fence." "My bridge nearly saved that stagecoach and everyone in it, which is more than your fence can say for itself." "My fence has never once tried to kill anyone," Andrew said. "That is one point in its favor over your bridge." Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the fear still sitting cold in her stomach from the morning's near disaster, Emma laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and Andrew Stone smiled at the sound of it. A real smile. And for just a moment the 8 years fell away and they were simply two people standing at a fence in the last gold light of a Montana afternoon, remembering how easy it had once been to talk to each other. That night, with the passengers bedded down in the store's spare room and on cots in the barn, and Cobb snoring on the porch with a blanket over his legs, Emma sat at Andrew's long table with a lamp between them and told him everything she knew, which amounted to less than she wished. "The bridge was sound 3 days ago," she said. "I inspected every joint myself before I left for supplies in Larkspur. When I came back this morning to finish the decking, the truss was cut. Recent. Clean. Somebody knew enough about bridge work to know exactly where to cut so it would hold light weight but fail under a loaded coach." "That takes more than a drifter with a grudge," Andrew said, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "That takes somebody who wants this pass road closed or wants it dangerous enough that folks stop using it. Who benefits from that?" Andrew was quiet a moment, and Emma watched him weigh his answer the way he had always weighed things, careful, unhurried, a man who thought twice before he spoke once. "There is a canyon road," he said finally. "Runs below the pass, longer, rougher, but it is the only other way through to Copper Gulch and the mining camps beyond. A man named Silas Corbin controls that road. Has for 2 years now. Calls it a toll, charges freight wagons and drummers and anybody hauling goods to the camps, and if you do not pay, your wagon has a way of losing a wheel, or your horses have a way of running off in the night." "That sounds a great deal like robbery," Emma said. "It is robbery," Andrew said. "But Marshal Wade in Larkspur has decided it is a private toll arrangement, and has decided that rather firmly ever since Corbin started paying his mortgage for him. Every complaint filed against Corbin's men gets misplaced or forgotten. Every witness gets quiet. I have watched it happen for 2 years, and there is not one thing I could do about it alone, because it is one storekeeper against a marshal's badge and a dozen armed men. And if my bridge is finished," Emma said slowly, understanding arriving cold and complete, "the canyon road becomes worthless. Nobody pays a toll to a man like Corbin if there is a free, faster road over the pass. That is the whole of it," Andrew said. "Your bridge is the first honest road through these mountains in 2 years that Corbin does not own. That makes it worth killing over to a man like that." Emma sat back, and the lamp flame trembled, and outside an owl called somewhere out over the dark pasture, and she thought of the cut truss and the roaring water beneath it, and the 6 lives that had nearly gone into that creek, because a man wanted his toll road protected. "Then I intend to finish it anyway," she said. Andrew looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face was proud and afraid in equal measure, an expression she remembered from years ago, the night before she left for Bozeman, when he had looked at her exactly this way and said nothing, and let her go. "I know you do," he said. "I would not expect anything less of you. I only hope you will let somebody watch your back while you do it, because Silas Corbin does not lose gracefully, and I have buried men who found that out too late." The days that followed fell into a rhythm neither of them had planned, but both, in their separate ways, came to treasure. The broken axle was mended at the forge in Larkspur, and the stagecoach continued on its route, but Emma did not go with it. The Road Commission's district office in Helena, when reached by wire from town, was firm that the bridge must be finished and the sabotage investigated before certification, and firmer still that Emma Garrison, as the contracted builder, was to remain on site to oversee repairs. She took a room at Andrew's store, chaste and proper, with the door closed and Tom Ellery's wife brought up from town as chaperone for propriety's sake, and each morning she walked the mile up to Copper Creek to work on her bridge, and each evening she walked back down to Andrew's table, and somewhere in the space of those walks, the 8 lost years began, slowly and carefully, to knit themselves back together. He was not the same young man she had known. He had gone quiet in ways that worried her at first, until she understood that his quiet was not absence but attention, the habit of a man who had learned to watch and listen before he spoke, a man who had buried a father and inherited 600 acres and built a life alone out of the raw material of loss. He told her, one evening on the porch while the sun went down gold and slow over the western ridges, that his father had died the winter after she left, of a fever that took hold in his chest and would not let go, and that he had spent the years since building the store into something solid, because it was the only thing he knew how to do with grief, build something that would last. You could have sold it, Emma said, gone somewhere else, started fresh. I thought about it, Andrew admitted. But this land is good land, Emma. 600 acres of grass that will feed cattle for 100 years if a man treats it right, and a store that sits at the only crossing for 40 miles in any direction. It seemed a poor thing to walk away from just because I was lonely in it. Are you lonely? He looked at her sideways, that dry humor surfacing again like a fish rising to the surface of a still pond. I have a hired man who talks to his horse more than he talks to me, a table built for 8 that I have never once filled past 2 chairs, and a rooster who hates me personally and expresses it every morning at first light. What do you think? I think, Emma said, that you built a table for 8 because some part of you was still hoping. Andrew did not answer that, but he did not deny it either, and the silence between them was warm instead of empty for the first time in a very long while. Their days were not all warmth and porch conversation, however. On the 4th morning, Emma arrived at the bridge site to find her tool chest overturned and half her supply of forged nails scattered into the creek. And on the 6th, 3 riders sat their horses on the far bank of Copper Creek for the better part of an hour, watching her work, saying nothing, doing nothing but watching, until she finally straightened from her sawhorses, put her hands on her hips, and shouted across the water that if they meant to say something, they were welcome to ride over and say it to her face, instead of loitering like buzzards. The riders had laughed and turned and ridden off toward the canyon road, and Emma had gone back to work with her hands shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the particular fury of being watched by men who thought a woman with a hammer was something to be laughed at. She told Andrew about it that evening, expecting sympathy, and got instead a long, careful look and a question. Did you recognize any of them? Number should I have? Sela's Corbin rides a gray gelding with a white blaze. None of the 3 you described were riding gray. That means it was likely 3 of his hired men, sent to look, not sent to act, which tells me Corbin is still deciding how much trouble he wants to cause over a bridge, and that decision could go either way depending on how badly your certification threatens his purse. You talk about him like you know him well. I know him well enough, Andrew said, and something closed in his face, a door shutting on a room he did not care to show her yet, and Emma, who had learned patience the hard way in 8 years of apprenticing under carpenters who did not believe women belonged with a hammer in hand, did not push. It was 3 nights later, with the moon nearly full and throwing long silver shadows across the pasture, that the trouble Andrew had predicted finally arrived, not with subtlety, but with fire. Emma woke to shouting and the smell of smoke, and by the time she had pulled on her boots and stumbled out onto the porch, the hay barn at the far end of Andrew's property was already burning, orange light licking up into the black sky, and Andrew Stone was running across the yard in his shirt sleeves with a rifle in one hand, shouting for Tom Ellery, shouting for buckets, shouting for anyone within hearing to help him save what stock he could before the fire spread to the main barn, where his 6 best horses stood trapped behind a door someone had jammed shut with a fence rail wedged through the handle. Emma did not think. She ran straight for the main barn, ignoring Andrew's shout of her name, and threw her whole weight against the jammed fence rail until it splintered and gave, and hauled the door open just as smoke began curling in under the eaves. And inside, 6 horses screamed and reared in their stalls, wild-eyed with terror, and Emma Garrison, who had spent 8 years learning to keep her hands steady around dangerous machinery, forced herself to walk instead of run, to speak low and even to each animal. to work the halters loose one by one and lead them, coughing, eyes streaming, out into the cool night air, while behind her the hay barn collapsed in a roar of sparks that lit the whole valley orange. Andrew found her afterward sitting in the dirt of the corral, soot-streaked, her hands blistered from hot leather, surrounded by 6 trembling horses she had saved with her own 2 hands, and he dropped to his knees in front of her without a word and simply held her, both of them shaking, both of them alive, while the barn burned itself down to embers behind them. "You could have died in there," he said finally, his voice rough. "Emma, that barn could have come down on you." "Your horses would have died if I had not gone in," Emma said, into his shoulder, because it was easier to talk that way than to look at him just then. "I was not going to stand in your yard and watch them burn." "I know," Andrew said. "I know you were not. That is exactly the trouble, Emma. That is exactly the same fool bravery that had you running across an unfinished bridge screaming at a stagecoach to stop, and I am beginning to think I am going to spend the rest of my life terrified for you." Emma pulled back far enough to look at him, at his soot-blackened face and the fear still raw in his eyes, and something in her chest that had been guarded and careful for 8 long years simply gave way. The way a wall gives way when the water behind it finally rises too high to hold. "The rest of your life is a long time to spend on one woman's foolishness," she said, and it came out softer than she meant, an offer disguised as a joke. "I have thought so for 8 years, Andrew said. "I do not expect that opinion to change now." He kissed her then, in the dying orange light of the burning barn, careful and slow, as though he had been waiting a very long time to be sure it was allowed, and Emma kissed him back with all the certainty she had lacked at 19 and had found, slowly and hard, in the years since. And around them the ruined barn smoked and settled and the horses grazed peacefully in the corral, unbothered now, and the mountains stood black and silent above them, holding their heavy snow, waiting for the season to turn. The sheriff who rode out from Larkspur the next morning to investigate the fire was not Marshal Wade himself, but his deputy, a thin, nervous young man named Purdy who took one look at the collapsed barn, one look at the scattered evidence of coal oil poured along the base of the walls, and declared, with a carefulness that suggested he had been coached, that it was likely an accident, a spark from the forge perhaps, carried on the wind. "There is no forge within 200 yards of that barn," Andrew said flatly, "and coal oil does not spark itself out of thin air, Deputy." "I will note your concerns in my report," Deputy Purdy said, not meeting Andrew's eyes, and rode back toward Larkspur at a pace that suggested he was glad to be leaving. "Wade will not touch this," Andrew told Emma afterward, standing amid the wreckage of his barn with his jaw set hard. "He has not touched a single complaint against Corbin's men in 2 years. This will go in a drawer somewhere and gather dust, same as the rest." "Then we find someone who will," Emma said. "The road commission has an inspector coming from Helena in 3 weeks to certify the bridge once it is finished, a man named Whitfield. If we can show him proof not just of the sabotage but of what Corbin is doing on that canyon road, extortion, arson, all of it, he can carry it to the territorial governor's office. A marshal's badge does not protect a man from the governor." "You are asking for proof against men who burn barns to keep from being caught," Andrew said. "That is not a small thing to ask for, Emma." "No," Emma agreed. "It is not. But I did not come 600 miles and build a bridge with my own 2 hands just to let it be handed over to men like Silas Corbin, because Marshal Wade would rather collect his bribe than do his sworn duty. I intend to finish what I started." Andrew looked at her for a long moment in the gray light of a morning after fire, and Emma watched him arrive, again, at the same careful decision he had made 8 years before, the decision to stand beside her rather than in front of her, to let her fight her own fights while making certain she never had to fight them entirely alone. "Then I intend to help you," he said. 600 acres and a burned barn are not going to change my mind about that." The bridge rose slowly over the following 2 weeks, decking laid board by board. The cut truss replaced entirely with new timber Emma cut and shaped herself, working from before dawn until the light failed, with Tom Ellery hauling lumber and Andrew coming up most afternoons to lend his own steady hands to the work. And in the evenings, over Andrew's long table, they built something else entirely, a fragile, careful truss that neither of them named aloud, but both of them tended like a fire that needed watching. They argued, of course, the way two stubborn people who cared for each other always would. Emma insisted on inspecting every joint of the bridge herself, twice, sometimes 3 times, and Andrew teased her mercilessly about it, calling her more particular than a cat choosing where to sit. And Emma retaliated by pointing out that a man who alphabetized his dry goods shelves by both name and size had no business calling anyone else particular. And Andrew, wounded, declared that an organized shelf was simply good business practice. And Emma, laughing, told him that good business practice did not require him to know exactly how many tins of peaches he had on hand without counting. And Andrew, with wounded dignity, informed her that he had 31 tins of peaches and had known that number for a week without needing to count. "Thank you very much." And Emma had laughed until she had to sit down on an overturned bucket to catch her breath, and Andrew had watched her laugh with an expression on his face that had nothing to do with peaches at all. It was during one of those evenings, with the lamp burning low and a cool spring rain drumming on the tin roof, that Andrew finally told her the rest of what he knew about Silas Corbin, the part he had kept guarded behind that closed door in his expression. "Corbin came through here 5 years ago," Andrew said, turning his coffee cup slowly, not looking at her. "Before you would have heard of him. He was running cattle then, or claiming to, though half of what he ran had brands that did not match his bill of sale. My father caught him rebranding calves out past the north fence, calves that belonged to 3 different ranchers in the valley, and my father, being the kind of man he was, rode into Larkspur and reported it to the marshal before Wade held the office, back when a man named Hollis wore the badge. What happened? Hollis arrested Corbin. Corbin's lawyer, a slick young man out of Helena, had him released inside a week on a technicality nobody could quite explain. And 2 months later Hollis was dead of a fall from his own porch that nobody quite believed either, and Wade took the badge. And within a year Corbin had stopped running cattle and started running that canyon road instead, because he had learned that a toll on a road is a great deal safer than rustling other men's calves, provided you own the man wearing the badge. And your father? My father lived 4 more years after that, Andrew said. Long enough to see me grown, long enough to teach me most of what I know about this land and this life. But he never stopped watching his back after Hollis died, and I do not think he ever stopped believing that Corbin would come for him too someday if he pushed too hard. I have spent 5 years being careful not to push too hard, Emma. I'm not certain I know how to be anything else anymore. You went into a burning barn 3 weeks ago for 6 horses, Emma said quietly. That is not the behavior of a careful man. That was different, Andrew said. That was mine to protect. This, what you are asking, taking proof to a territorial inspector, exposing a marshal, that is a different kind of danger, Emma. That kind of danger does not end with a burned barn. It ends with men who disappear on lonely roads and are never found. I know, Emma said. I'm not asking you to be reckless, Andrew. I'm asking you to help me be careful and brave at the same time because I do not know how to do that alone and I do not want to. He reached across the table and took her hand, turning it over gently to look at the calluses on her palm, the same rough marks his own hands carried, and he did not let go for a long while. All right, he said finally. Careful and brave. I believe I can manage that, provided you manage it alongside me. The bridge was finished on a bright, cold morning 3 days before the territorial inspector was due. Every joint sound, every truss tested twice, the decking smooth and solid beneath Emma's boots as she walked its full length one final time, with a satisfaction that ran deep and quiet through her chest. It was, she thought, the finest thing she had ever built, and she had built it in the teeth of men who wanted it to fail. And it had not failed, and there was a fierce joy in that, standing on her own good work with the creek roaring clean beneath her, and the mountains rising white and heavy all around. That joy lasted exactly until she rode down to Larkspur the next morning to send a wire confirming the inspector's arrival, and found Marshal Tobias Wade himself waiting for her outside the telegraph office, flanked by two men she did not recognize, one of whom was riding a gray gelding with a distinctive white blaze down its long face. "Miss Garrison," Marshal Wade said, in a voice that tried for pleasant and landed somewhere closer to a threat wrapped in courtesy. "I understand your bridge is finished." "It is," Emma said, keeping her voice even, keeping her eyes on his rather than on the man with the gray gelding. "That is a fine achievement," Wade said. "A woman building a bridge like that alone out here. Folks in town are talking about it. Course, folks in town also talk about how a bridge that near got a coach full of good citizens killed just 3 weeks back might not be the safest crossing for the Territorial Road Commission to be putting their stamp on. The sabotage that nearly caused that accident has been reported," Emma said. "The truss has been replaced entirely. The bridge is sound." "I am sure it is," Wade said, in a tone that suggested he was sure of nothing of the kind and did not care to be. "But accidents do have a way of repeating themselves, Miss Garrison, especially on roads that do not see regular travel and regular upkeep. It would be a terrible shame if your fine bridge developed a reputation, before it even got itself certified, as an unlucky crossing. Folks might decide they would rather take the long way around, through the canyon, where the road is well kept and well watched." There it was, laid out plain as a hand of cards on a table, and Emma understood, with a coldness that settled deep in her stomach, that this was not idle conversation. This was a warning, and possibly an offer, if she chose to hear it that way, an offer to abandon her own bridge quietly in exchange for being left alone. "I intend to see my bridge certified, Marshal," Emma said, "and I intend to report the sabotage and the fire at Andrew Stone's property to the territorial inspector when he arrives Thursday, along with anything else I learn between now and then about who might be responsible for both." Something flickered behind Wade's eyes, gone as quickly as it came, but Emma had spent enough years reading the small tales of men who did not think a woman capable of reading them at all, and she saw it clearly. Fear, or something close to it. "That would be an unwise use of your time, Miss Garrison," Wade said, and the courtesy had drained entirely out of his voice now. "This is a hard country for a woman working alone. Accidents happen out here more often than you would credit, to folks who go looking for trouble that is not rightly theirs to find." "I have found," Emma said, "that the trouble in this country belongs to whoever is willing to put their name to it, Marshal, and I intend to put mine to this." She turned and walked back to her horse before he could answer, her spine straight, her heart hammering, and she did not look back to see whether Wade or his men were watching her go, though she felt their eyes on her the whole length of the street, like a physical weight pressing between her shoulder blades. She told Andrew everything that evening and watched his face go through fear and anger and something colder and more resolved, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time, looking at the lamp flame rather than at her. "He threatened you," Andrew said finally. "He implied a great many things without quite threatening anything outright," Emma said. "Which is, I suspect, exactly how he has kept his badge and Corbin's money for 2 years without ever being caught at it." "I want you to leave," Andrew said, and the words came out rough, torn loose from someplace he had clearly been fighting to keep them shut inside. "Not forever, just until the inspector comes and this is finished. Go stay in Larkspur at the hotel, or better, go back to Helena for a week, out of Wade's reach, out of Corbin's reach." "Andrew, I mean it, Emma. I have already lost a father to this man's shadow. I am not prepared to lose you to it as well, not now, not when I have only just gotten you back." "And if I go," Emma said, keeping her voice gentle but not backing down from it, "what happens to you and to this store, and to 600 acres that Silas Corbin's men already burned a barn on once? Do you imagine they will simply leave you be once I am gone? Or do you imagine Wade will decide you have caused quite enough trouble on your own account, being the man who has been sheltering me?" Andrew did not have an answer for that, because there was not a good one, and they both knew it. And the argument that followed was not the playful, teasing kind they had grown used to over the past weeks. It was raw and frightened and full of the particular cruelty that only people who love each other can inflict, each of them trying, in their own stubborn way, to protect the other by demanding they be less brave, and neither of them willing to hear it. "You cannot ask me to run," Emma said finally, standing at the door with her hand on the frame. "I have spent my whole life being told that the things I want to build are too dangerous, too heavy, too much for a woman to carry, and I have carried them anyway. And I am not going to stop now because a marshal with a bought badge does not care for the sight of me finishing what I started. And I cannot watch you walk into that danger without trying every single thing I know to stop it," Andrew said. "That is not the same as doubting what you can carry, Emma. That is loving you enough to be afraid of losing you." "Then be afraid," Emma said, softer now, some of the fight going out of her. "But do not ask me to be less than I am because of it. I could not love you back properly if you did." She left that night, not for Larkspur and not for Helena, but for the bridge site itself, taking a bedroll and a lantern and sleeping alone beside her own finished work, needing the distance, needing to think without the weight of Andrew's fear pressing against her own resolve. And Andrew let her go, though it cost him visibly to do it, standing on his porch in the dark watching her walk away up the grade, his jaw tight, his hands empty at his sides. Neither of them slept well. By morning, something had shifted in Emma. Some clarity arrived in the cold hours beside the roaring creek, and she came down off the mountain before first light with her decision already made, though not the decision Andrew had asked for. She found him in the barnyard, already awake, already saddling a horse with the particular grim focus of a man about to do something he had decided was necessary and dangerous in equal measure. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Larkspur," Andrew said, not looking up from the cinch. "I sent word last night to a man I trust, a lawyer named Prescott who handled my father's estate. Wade means to bury a report. I intend to make certain there is a copy of everything, the sabotage, the fire, this conversation yesterday, sitting somewhere Wade cannot reach it before the inspector arrives." "I am coming with you," Emma said. Andrew looked up at her then, and something in his face was raw with the same fear from the night before, but something else in it, something new, had steadied. "I was not going to ask you to run," he said. "Not really. I said it out of fear, and I am sorry for it. I know you well enough, and have known you long enough, to understand that asking you to be small is asking you to be someone else entirely, and I do not want someone else. I have only ever wanted you." "Then let us go be careful and brave together," Emma said, echoing his own words back to him, and something in Andrew's shoulders eased, and he reached for her hand and held it a moment before helping her mount her own horse, and together they rode for Larkspur under a sky just beginning to lighten in the east. The lawyer Prescott listened to their account with a growing frown and agreed to prepare sworn statements to be held in a Helena Bank vault, safe from any local interference, and word of their visit to his office, unfortunately, traveled exactly as fast through Larkspur as such things always did in a small territorial town. And by the time Emma and Andrew rode back out toward the store that afternoon, they were being watched, openly now, by two of Corbin's riders who trailed them at a careful distance the entire 6 miles home. That night, the trouble that had been building for weeks finally broke. Emma woke to the sound of horses in the yard, many horses, and Andrew was already up, already at the window with his rifle in hand, his face grim in the moonlight. "Corbin," he said quietly. "That is his gray gelding and 5 others with him. Emma, get away from the window." Through the gap in the curtain, Emma saw them, 6 riders sitting their horses in the yard in the pale moonlight, and at the front of them a broad-shouldered man in a long coat who sat easy in his saddle the way men do when they are accustomed to being obeyed, and though she had never seen him before, She knew at once that this was Sela's Corbin. "Stone," Corbin called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "I hear you and your lady friend paid a visit to Prescott's office today. I hear there is talk of sworn statements and a Helena Bank vault, and an inspector coming Thursday who might take an interest in reading them." Andrew did not answer, did not step out onto the porch, simply stood at the window with his rifle ready, and beside him Emma reached for the second rifle kept above the door, her hand steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I am a reasonable man," Corbin continued. "I do not want trouble I do not have to have. That bridge of yours, Miss Garrison, if it were to develop an unfortunate structural problem before Thursday, one that could not rightly be blamed on sabotage this time, just poor material, poor workmanship, the kind of thing that happens to inexperienced builders, well, that would solve a great many problems for a great many people, and nobody would need to get hurt over sworn statements or bank vaults at all." "That bridge is sound," Emma called back before Andrew could stop her, stepping into view at the window despite his hissed protest. "It will hold, Mr. Corbin, and it will be certified Thursday, and everything you and Marshal Wade have done to this road and to the people who use it will be in that report as well." There was a long silence in the yard, and Corbin's horse shifted beneath him, and finally the man in the long coat laughed, low and without much warmth in it at all. "Stubborn woman," he said. "I have heard that about you. Well, I will leave you to consider your position, Miss Garrison, Mr. Stone. Consider it carefully. I have a great deal invested in that canyon road, and I do not intend to lose it to a bridge, or a report, or a woman with a hammer, whatever fine notions the territorial government has about progress. Thursday is not far off. Think on what that means for both of you, and for 600 acres that would burn a good deal faster than one barn did if it came to that." He turned his horse and the others followed, riding off into the dark toward the canyon road, and Andrew and Emma stood at the window long after the sound of hooves had faded, both of them shaking with the particular exhaustion that comes after fear has nowhere left to go. "He is going to try again," Emma said, "before Thursday. He has to. His whole enterprise fails the moment that bridge is certified." "I know," Andrew said. "Which means we need to be at that bridge day and night until the inspector arrives, because I am not giving him the chance to touch one board of it." They set watches after that, taking turns through the remaining nights before Whitfield's arrival, sleeping in shifts in a canvas tent pitched beside the bridge, and it was in those long, quiet, watchful hours, wrapped in blankets against the cold mountain air with the creek roaring below and the stars wheeling overhead, that whatever remained unspoken between them finally found its words. "I used to think about you," Andrew admitted, on the second night, his voice barely above the sound of the water. "More than I ever let on. I used to imagine you out there somewhere building things, and I used to be glad of it, even while it hurt something terrible, because I thought, at least she is doing what she was always meant to do, even if it is not with me." "I thought about you too," Emma said. "Every table I ever built, I used to think, I wonder if Andrew would find that joint too tight or too loose. I wonder what he would say about the grain of this wood. I never stopped hearing your voice in my head, Andrew, even when I told myself I had put you away entirely." "I built a table for 8, Andrew said, "and I never once sat more than one chair at it in 8 years because some fool part of me kept thinking if I build it big enough, maybe someday it will not be empty anymore." Emma reached across the small space between their bedrolls and found his hand in the dark. "It will not be empty much longer," she said. "I intend to see to that personally, once this business with Corbin is finished." "Is that a promise, Miss Garrison?" "That," Emma said, "is a fact, Mr. Stone, same as any joint I have ever cut. Solid and built to last." He kissed her knuckles, there in the dark beside the roaring creek, and neither of them said anything more that night, because nothing more needed saying, and the silence between them now was the good kind, warm and certain. A house with all its doors closed against the cold and a fire burning steady inside. Thursday arrived gray and cold, with a wind coming down off the peaks that smelled of snow, though it was late in the season for it, and Emma stood at the near end of her bridge with Andrew beside her, watching the road for the dust of the inspector's wagon, when instead of dust, they heard gunfire, distant, coming from somewhere up near the high bowls where the last of the winter's heavy snow still clung to the north-facing slopes. "That is not the inspector," Andrew said, going still, listening. "That is coming from Widow's Shelf, the canyon road." "Corbin," Emma said. "Maybe," Andrew said. "Or maybe somebody trying to make certain the inspector never reaches your bridge at all." "Emma, if Corbin means to stop this certification, and he cannot touch the bridge with us watching it day and night, the only other way to stop it is to make certain Whitfield never arrives." They rode for the canyon road at a dead gallop, Andrew in the lead, Emma close behind, both of them abandoning the bridge they had guarded so carefully because some things mattered more. And as they crested the last ridge above Widow's Shelf, Emma's stomach dropped at the sight below. The inspector's wagon, a light spring buggy with the territorial seal painted on its door, sat stopped in the middle of the narrow canyon road, one wheel hanging over the edge where the shelf narrowed to barely a wagon's width above a sheer drop to the creek far below, and 3 riders were closing in on it from the far side, while the driver, a stout man in a bowler hat who could only be Whitfield himself, struggled to back the frightened team away from the drop without simply tipping the whole rig over the edge. Above them, on the steep slopes overlooking the shelf, Emma could see the heavy shelves of old snow, unstable in the spring warmth, hanging in great cornices that any sharp sound, any concussion, might send tumbling down onto the road below. "They are trying to spook him into wrecking the wagon," Andrew said grimly. "Or worse, trying to trap him against that drop until they can make it look like an accident." "That's snow," Emma said, her carpenter's eye reading the slope with the same instinct she used to read a strained beam. "Andrew, look at that overhang above the shelf. One good sound, a gunshot, a rockfall, and that whole cornice comes down on the road." "Then we had better make certain nobody fires a shot," Andrew said, and kicked his horse forward down the steep switchback trail toward the canyon floor, Emma right behind him, both of them riding harder than either had ridden in years, the wind tearing at them, the drop yawning ever closer on their left as the trail narrowed toward the shelf itself. They came around the final bend just as one of Corbin's riders leveled a pistol at the inspector's team, and Andrew's own rifle came up in the same motion. He used to bring it down off his shoulder, and the shot he fired went not at the rider, but into the rock face above him, a deliberate, calculated warning that cracked like thunder through the canyon and sent the rider's horse rearing in fright, the pistol firing wild into the air instead of at the team. For one terrible moment, everyone on that narrow shelf froze, staring upward, because the sound of 2 gunshots so close together, echoing off canyon walls already primed with heavy wet snow, was exactly the kind of concussion that Emma had feared, and above them, with a sound like the world tearing slowly in half, the great cornice of snow overhanging the shelf began, almost gently at first, to slide. "Move!" Emma screamed. "Everybody move now, that whole slope is coming down." There was no time for plans, no time for anything but instinct. Andrew wheeled his horse and drove it hard toward the inspector's wagon, shouting for Whitfield to abandon the buggy and climb up behind him. And Emma, seeing the 2 of Corbin's riders nearest the coming slide frozen in indecision, screamed at them too, because whatever else they were, however much harm they had meant to do, she was not prepared to watch men buried alive over a toll road, and her warning broke their paralysis enough that they spurred their horses back the way they had come, racing the growing roar of the slide toward the wider road beyond the shelf. Andrew reached the wagon just as Whitfield scrambled free of it and hauled the stout inspector up behind his saddle with a strength Emma had not fully appreciated until that moment, and turned his horse back toward her, toward the narrow trail they had come down, and above them the whole mountainside was moving now, a wall of snow and rock and broken timber thundering down toward the shelf where the abandoned buggy still stood. "Emma, go!" Andrew shouted. "There is no time, ride," she rode. She put her heels to her horse's flanks and rode flat out along the narrowing shelf with the roar of the avalanche growing behind her, close enough that she could feel the wind of its passage pushing at her back, close enough that, when it finally struck the shelf and the buggy and everything on that stretch of road, the ground itself seemed to shudder beneath her horse's hooves, and a great cloud of snow and pulverized rock rolled out across the canyon floor and up the far wall. And for one endless moment, the world was white, and roaring, and Emma could not tell whether she had outrun it or not. Then she was through, onto the wider bend of the road beyond the shelf, her horse trembling and blowing hard beneath her. And behind her, seconds later, Andrew came through as well, Whitfield clinging to him white-faced and gasping, and the three of them sat their horses in stunned silence, looking back at where the shelf had been, now buried under 20 feet of snow and broken rock, the buggy crushed somewhere beneath it, the road itself impassable. Of Corbin's riders, there was no sign at all, though later it would be learned that all three had made it clear in time, chastened badly enough by the near miss, that one of them, within the week, would find his conscience loose enough to talk. That, Whitfield said finally, in a voice that shook only slightly, was the single most alarming experience of my professional career, and I have inspected bridges after flash floods, Mr. Stone. I do not say that lightly. You are alive, Andrew said. That is the important part. I am alive because you rode into that to pull me out, Whitfield said, and because this young woman had the wit to shout a warning that gave everyone the seconds they needed to run instead of freeze. I do not forget things like that, Mr. Stone, Miss Garrison. I have decades left in this territorial service, and I do not forget. It took the better part of 2 days to arrange an alternate route around the buried canyon road, and by the time Whitfield finally stood on Emma's bridge over Copper Creek, testing the decking with his own boots, checking the joints with the careful eye of a man who had genuinely inspected bridges for a living, 3 of Corbin's riders had already been picked up by a suddenly emboldened Deputy Purdy, who had apparently decided, after nearly watching an avalanche kill a territorial inspector, that his loyalty to Marshal Wade's arrangement with Corbin was not worth what remained of his own conscience, and the riders, faced with charges of attempted murder of a territorial officer, had talked freely and at length about sabotage, about the fire, about 2 years of tolls collected under threat, and about a marshal who had been paid regularly and substantially to look the other way. Marshal Tobias Wade did not wait to be arrested. He was gone from Larkspur within a day of the first arrests, his badge left on his desk, his horse and whatever coin he could carry gone with him into country nobody cared to follow him into. And Silas Corbin, without a badge to shelter him, and with 3 of his own men testifying against him for a lighter sentence, was taken into custody by a federal marshal summoned up from Helena within the week. The Canyon Road toll ended as abruptly as it had begun. It should have been, Emma thought, the end of the story, a clean and satisfying close to a hard fight fairly won, and for a few days it seemed exactly that, the bridge certified, Corbin in irons, Wade fled and disgraced, Andrew's land and store finally safe from the shadow that had hung over both for 2 years. But Elias Whitfield, sitting at Andrew's long table 3 evenings later with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him and a look of genuine regret on his broad face, brought news that landed heavier than either of them expected. "The Territorial Road Commission is grateful for your work, Miss Garrison, truly," he said. "Your bridge is sound, better built than half the crossings I have certified this year, and it has already proven its worth. But there is a political reality I would be doing you a disservice to hide from you. The scandal around Wade and Corbin has drawn a great deal of attention in Helena, and there are men on the commission and in the governor's office who feel that a project so publicly associated with sabotage and violence, however unfairly, needs a fresh face attached to it going forward to reassure the freight companies and the mining interests that the pass road is entirely, unquestionably safe." "A fresh face," Emma repeated slowly, "meaning not mine." "There is a contractor, A man named Delacroix out of Bozeman, well-connected, well-regarded, who has already petitioned to be named the Commission's official maintenance contractor for the Copper Creek crossing going forward, citing his experience, and I am sorry to say, citing your gender as a further point of public reassurance he feels he can offer that you, however skilled, cannot. I argued against it. I told them plainly that no man on that commission has built a sounder bridge than the one I stood on myself. But I am one voice, Miss Garrison, and politics in the territory does not always bend to good sense. Emma sat very still, and Andrew watched her face and saw the particular kind of exhaustion settle over her that came not from fear but from a weariness 8 years deep, the weariness of a woman who had fought this exact fight, in one form or another, her whole working life, and who was tired, bone-tired, of fighting it again and again with no end in sight. Perhaps that would be simplest, she said quietly after a long moment. The bridge stands. It will hold whoever's name is on the maintenance contract going forward. Perhaps it does not matter whose name that is, so long as the crossing is safe, and the tolls are gone, and Andrew's land is no longer threatened by men like Corbin. I have already built what I set out to build. Emma. Andrew's voice was sharp enough that both Emma and Whitfield looked at him. You cannot mean that. I mean that I am tired, Andrew, Emma said, and there was real weariness in it, not defeat exactly, but something close to surrender. I have spent 2 months proving myself against saboteurs and marshals, and now, apparently, politics, and if giving up the credit for one bridge is the price of finally being left in peace, of you being left in peace, of not having to spend the rest of our lives being watched and threatened by whoever decides a woman with a hammer is too much trouble for their comfort, then perhaps that is a price worth paying. No, Andrew said, and he said it with a force that surprised even himself, standing up from the table so abruptly his chair scraped hard against the floor. No, Emma, I will not let you pay that price, not for me, not for anyone. I have watched you fight for this bridge against men who tried to kill you for it, and I will not sit at my own table and watch you hand it away to a man in Bozeman simply because it would be easier, because some part of you has decided that peace is worth more than what you built with your own hands. Andrew, it is not that simple. It is exactly that simple, Andrew said. You told me that first week that you did not build furniture better than your father by the time you were 16, just to spend your life keeping quiet about it. You did not ride into gunfire on a canyon shelf to save a territorial inspector's life, just to let another man's name go on the plaque at the end of your bridge because it is politically convenient. I did not fall in love with a woman who gives up, Emma Garrison, and I am not going to stand by while you decide, for my sake, to become one. Whitfield, sitting between them with his coffee entirely forgotten, cleared his throat. For what it may be worth, he said carefully, I did not come here only to deliver bad news. I came to tell you that I intend to file my own report, directly to the governor's office, recommending Miss Garrison be named the Commission's permanent engineer for the Pass Road, on the strength of the work I inspected myself and the conduct I witnessed on that canyon shelf. Delacroix has connections, but I have witnessed testimony, and a governor who has just watched his territory's newspapers print 2 weeks of stories about a corrupt marshal, and an extortion ring is not, in my experience, inclined to overrule the recommendation of his own inspector in favor of political convenience, not when the alternative makes for a very fine headline of its own. A woman engineer who exposed sabotage and outran an avalanche to save a territorial official's life is not a scandal to be hidden from, Miss Garrison. She is a story the governor's office would be fools not to want attached to their name. Emma looked between the two men, Andrew standing with his jaw set and his hands braced on the table, Whitfield watching her with something like hope in his broad, tired face, and something in her chest that had gone quiet and resigned only minutes before began, cautiously, to lift again. You would do that, she said. File a report recommending me, knowing it might cost you standing with Delacroix's connections. Miss Garrison, Whitfield said, I have spent 20 years inspecting other men's work and finding it wanting far more often than I found yours. I did not survive 2 decades in territorial service by being afraid of a well-connected man in Bozeman. I intend to file that report tomorrow morning, and I intend to make certain it is read by everyone who matters before Mr. Delacroix's petition ever reaches the governor's desk. It took another 6 weeks for the matter to be settled properly, weeks in which Emma finished the last details of the bridge, and Andrew rebuilt his burned barn with lumber. Emma helped him choose and cut, both of them working side by side under the lengthening spring days, as the last of the mountain snow finally gave way and ran clean and cold down into Copper Creek. And the pass road, safe now, saw its first steady traffic of freight wagons and drummers and families heading for the mining camps. All of them crossing Emma Garrison's bridge without a second thought, which was, she came to realize, its own kind of honor, greater perhaps than any name on any plaque. The governor's appointment, when it finally arrived by official letter carried up from Larkspur, named Emma Garrison as the Territorial Road Commission's engineer of record for the Copper Creek crossing and its future maintenance, with a note in Whitfield's own hand tucked inside the official envelope, wishing her every success and adding in a postscript that he had never in 20 years enjoyed filing a report so thoroughly. Emma read the letter standing at Andrew's long table, the same table where she had once told Whitfield she was tired enough to give it all away, and when she finished reading, she found Andrew watching her from across the room with an expression that held no surprise at all, only quiet, certain pride. "You knew," she said. "I hoped," Andrew corrected gently. "There is a difference." "I hoped, and I refused to let you give up before that hope had its chance, and I am glad, more glad than I know how to say, that it did not need to be spent." Emma crossed the room and set the letter down on the table and put her arms around him, and Andrew held her the way he had held her the night of the fire, careful and complete, and this time there was no fear in it, only the settled, certain warmth of two people who had fought hard for something and finally, fully won it. "I have been thinking," Andrew said, some while later, both of them sitting now at his long table with the evening light coming gold through the windows, "about that table for 8. "Have you?" Emma said, smiling against his shoulder. "I built it thinking of a family I did not have," Andrew said. "I think now I would rather build a life around the 2 chairs we actually use, and let the rest fill in honestly in its own time, rather than hoping at an empty table for 8 years and calling that living." "That sounds," Emma said, "like a man asking a woman to marry him, though he is taking a remarkably long way around to say so." "I am a storekeeper," Andrew said, with the dry humor she had come to treasure above almost anything else about him. "We take inventory before we make a purchase." "I wanted to be certain of my accounting. And are you certain?" "Emma Garrison," Andrew said, taking her hand across the table, his voice losing every trace of humor and settling into something plain and true. "I have loved you since I was 22 years old and too foolish to say so properly, and I have spent 8 years since learning exactly how much I regretted that foolishness, and I do not intend to spend one more day regretting it further. Will you marry me and help me fill this table properly, and build whatever else this land has room for together, the 2 of us, careful and brave in equal measure, same as we promised each other on that mountain?" "Yes," Emma said, without a single moment's hesitation, the answer arriving as solid and certain as any joint she had ever cut. "Yes, Andrew Stone, I will." They were married in Larkspur 3 weeks later, in the small white church at the end of the main street, with Tom Ellery and his wife standing witness, and Elias Whitfield, who made the long ride out from Helena especially for the occasion, giving Emma away with the gruff pride of a man who had come to think of her, in the short months of their acquaintance, as something like a daughter he had not known he wanted, and half of Larkspur turned out besides. Grateful in their own way for a marshal exposed, and a road made safe and a bridge that had, in the end, held exactly as its builder promised it would. They held the wedding supper back at Andrew's store, at the long table built for 8, and for the first time in the years since Andrew's father had died, every chair at that table was filled, with Tom and his wife, with Whitfield telling anyone who would listen about the day he had nearly been buried under an avalanche and lived to be grateful for it, with Cobb the stage driver, who had ridden out specially to toast the woman who had once saved his life on an unfinished bridge, with neighbors from up and down the valley who had never dared hope the canyon toll would end in their lifetimes, and at the head of it all, Andrew Stone and Emma Garrison, now Emma Stone, sitting close together in the golden lamplight, her hand in his beneath the table where no one could see, though anyone looking at either of their faces would have known exactly how they felt regardless. Later, after the guests had gone and the lamps had been turned low, they walked out together to stand at the fence line where a stagecoach had once broken a rail and broken open. In doing so, 8 years of careful silence between them, and above them the mountains stood dark and quiet, their heavy winter snow finally spent, the avalanche season past, the creek running clear and steady down toward a bridge that would carry travelers safely for years to come, built by a woman's hands and defended in the end by 2 people who had chosen, again and again, to be careful and brave together rather than safe and small apart. 600 acres, Emma said, leaning into his side, and 1 table that will never be empty again. 600 acres, Andrew agreed, 1 full table and 1 very stubborn wife who I intend to spend the rest of my life being grateful for. I intend to hold you to that, Emma said. I would not have it any other way, Andrew said, and kissed her there at the mended fence line, beneath the last stars fading into a Montana dawn, with the whole rest of their lives spread out before them, solid and sound and built, like everything worth having to last.